Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never thought I'd reach the point where I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. My name's Ethan, I'm 38, and I've been married to Claire for 12 years. On paper, we had everything people say you're supposed to have. Good jobs, a house in the suburbs, 2 kids, the occasional vacation. I always believed we had a solid partnership, the kind of relationship people envy but rarely talk about. At least that's what I thought. The first time I noticed something was off, it wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no fights, nothing explosive. Claire had started staying later at work, which she blamed on new responsibilities. At first I believed her. I even offered to take over errands or pick up the kids from school. I thought maybe she was just stressed. But then the little things started adding up. The texts I used to get during the day, short, friendly, flirty, stopped. And she'd come home, smile politely, but there was a distance in her eyes, a subtle coldness that I couldn't ignore. I tried talking to her. I asked casually, "Is everything okay?" She'd nod, say she was fine, and change the subject. The more I asked, the more she pulled away. I couldn't sleep some nights, tossing and turning, replaying conversations, wondering if I'd done something wrong. I was a reasonable man. I held my temper. I gave her space, patience, kindness, but none of it seemed to matter. Weeks turned into months, and I started feeling a gnawing unease I couldn't shake. My friends noticed. Lucas, my oldest friend, said I was overthinking. But I knew something had shifted. The warmth, the connection we had was gone, and I didn't know if I could get it back. I felt like I was watching my marriage from the outside. The house was the same, the kids were the same, the furniture was the same, but the bond between us was gone. That's when the idea first crossed my mind. I needed proof. Not because I wanted to accuse her blindly, but because I couldn't face the growing suspicion that maybe she wasn't being honest about her nights out, her coworkers, or the long drives she suddenly had to make after work. I hired a private investigator. I'll admit, even arranging it made me feel guilty. I told myself it was for peace of mind. I kept thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just paranoia. But deep down I needed to know. The PI's first report came back within a week. Claire was going to the usual places she'd told me about. Office, coffee shop, gym. Nothing out of the ordinary. I exhaled, thinking maybe I'd jumped to conclusions. Maybe my marriage was still intact, just in a rough patch. Then came the second week of surveillance. The PI called me one evening, voice low, almost hesitant. "Ethan, I have some photos. You might want to see these." My stomach tightened before he even sent them. I opened the link, expecting maybe a colleague from work or a friend I didn't know about. And then I froze. There she was, Claire, smiling at someone I didn't recognize at first. The man looked familiar, almost strikingly so, but the more I looked, the more my chest started to pound. This wasn't a random stranger. This wasn't a harmless coworker. This was Jake, Claire's childhood friend, someone I'd met dozens of times over the years. Someone I had never considered a threat. I stared at the pictures, blinking rapidly, as if blinking faster would somehow make my brain process this more slowly. There were multiple photos. Coffee in the morning, laughing outside a boutique, a hand on her shoulder in a way I'd only ever seen with me. Each photo hit harder than the last. I felt my hands shake, my stomach knot. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to rationalize, tell myself, it's innocent. They're just friends. But the way she looked at him, the closeness in the photos, it was intimate. I couldn't move for a few minutes. Sitting at my desk, staring at the screen, my mind raced back over every recent conversation, every late night, every dismissive smile. Every time she'd brushed me off, claiming she was tired, stressed, or busy, I realized I had been blind. The subtle signs, the tiny evasions, the unexplained absences, they weren't coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see. I remember sitting back, trying to control my breathing. The house was quiet, the kids asleep, the world outside oblivious to the storm inside me. And that's when it hit, the raw, suffocating clarity of betrayal. It wasn't just that she was hiding something. It wasn't just the deceit. It was that the person I loved, the woman I trusted with my life, had formed this bond behind my back. Something inside me snapped, but not in anger yet. Not the kind that explodes in shouting or glass breaking. This was a cold, hard, consuming clarity. I needed to act. And I knew the moment I looked at those photos that my next steps would change everything. I shut my laptop slowly, trying to steady my hands, but the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. Every thought spiraled. How long had this been going on? How much had I missed while trusting blindly? I couldn't stop picturing Claire's laugh in those photos, the casual brush of Jake's hand, the way she leaned into him like she hadn't done with me in months. I thought about confronting her immediately, but something in me whispered caution. I had to be sure, not just about the photos, but about my own feelings, my own reaction. Acting impulsively would only give her power over me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I waited. I watched, I observed, and I planned silently. The next day, Claire came home looking normal, smiling, asking about my day, laughing at a joke I didn't even make. My chest tightened. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to throw the evidence in her face, but I didn't. I kept my calm. I nodded, smiled, even laughed along. On the surface, everything was still the picture of normalcy. But beneath it, I felt a quiet storm brewing, one that had been growing for weeks, finally finding its release. That evening, I reviewed the rest of the photos. Each one was worse than the last. Lunches, walks in the park, casual touches that seemed innocent if taken alone, but strung together, they painted a different picture. A story of intimacy, secrecy, and betrayal. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief that made my head spin. For a long time, I'd tried to rationalize everything. The late nights, the evasive answers, the distance. But now every excuse evaporated. I couldn't let this go unnoticed. Not for my pride, not for my sanity, and certainly not for my dignity. I picked up the phone and called Lucas. My voice was low, tight, controlled. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, just that I needed advice. He came over within the hour, sensing something was deeply wrong. When I showed him the photos, his reaction was immediate. "Ethan, she's crossed a line," he said quietly, eyes scanning each image. "This isn't about work or friends, this is betrayal." I nodded, feeling a bitter taste of confirmation. It was worse than I imagined, yet the clarity it brought felt strangely empowering. For the first time in weeks, I felt I could act without confusion clouding my judgment. That night, I didn't confront Claire. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I didn't beg. I sat in our living room alone, watching her move around the house, doing the same things she always did, pretending nothing had changed, pretending she wasn't hiding a secret that had just torn the foundation of our marriage. And I realized that my next step had to be deliberate, calculated. I needed to reclaim control, but not through chaos. Control through clarity, control through reason, control through dignity. Over the next few days, I set boundaries silently. I limited conversations to necessities. I observed her every move without accusation, and I watched as she continued to exist in a world where she assumed nothing would change, where she believed the truth could remain hidden. But the truth, I realized, had already shifted everything. The confrontation eventually came, not in anger, not in a dramatic outburst, but in a quiet, unavoidable moment. Claire returned home later than usual one evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the photos spread in front of me. She paused in the doorway, eyes flicking between the images and me, a sudden, unguarded panic crossing her face. What is this?" she stammered. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply looked at her, steady and calm, the weight of weeks of suspicion, betrayal, and heartache finally condensing into one undeniable truth. "Claire," I said, voice measured, "I know everything." She froze, the color draining from her face. I watched as the mask of casualness fell away. The laughter, the smiles, the excuses, all gone. Just the stark, silent acknowledgement of the reality I discovered. It wasn't easy to watch. Seeing someone you love so intimately caught in dishonesty is a kind of pain that feels endless. But within that pain was clarity. For the first time in months, I felt the air around me shift. The anxiety, the second-guessing, the endless nights of worry, they were replaced with purpose. I realized that control had always been mine, if only I had the courage to claim it. She tried to explain, words tumbling out, desperate, unconvincing, heavy with excuses. But I didn't interrupt, I didn't argue. I let her speak, let her rationalize, let her stumble over explanations that no longer held any weight. Every word she said confirmed the undeniable fact. The trust between us was broken, perhaps irreparably. And then I said something I hadn't imagined I could. "I need time. You need to face the choices you've made. I can't ignore this anymore." I won't. She looked at me, eyes wide, as if the calm in my voice, the clarity in my stance was something foreign, something she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't pleading, I wasn't begging, I wasn't broken. I was grounded. I was resolute. As I walked away from the table that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a strange, heavy relief. The betrayal was real, but so was my ability to move forward, to reclaim control over my life, my heart, and my peace of mind. I realized that sometimes the hardest part isn't uncovering the truth. It's standing tall in the aftermath of it. And that night, I finally did.